It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
So as you know, I spend a lot of time talking about education and the fact that sadly, depending on where you live, it's kind of depends on what kind of an education you're going to get. You live in a poor neighborhood like I grew up in, chances are today you're going to get a much worse education than if you lived across the street in a better location. And that sadly has been borne out by the latest study, the 6th annual edition of the Albert Shanker Institute's report, The Adequacy and Fairness of State School Finance System. Figure that one out. Where they say 39 states are now devoting less money as a part of their economies to K through 12 education than they did before the 2007-2009 recession. We're going backwards. And the question is where'd that money go? Did we give it to corporate America? Did we give it to rich people? Or is this the dividing of the pot? And here to share some thoughts on this report and maybe what we need to be doing. I've asked Mark Weber to come talk with us. He's a special analyst for education policy with the New Jersey Policy Perspective. He's also a lecturer on education policy at Rutgers University and one of the co-authors of this report. Mark, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick. It's always great to be here.
So the 6th annual report, any surprises coming out of this one? Anything new from the last 5?
Sadly, no. We are singing the same song over and over again, as far as I can tell. You said something really interesting in the introduction about depending on where you grew up, that would lead to what kind of education you received. And that was true for different neighborhoods. But in our report, we're showing it's true for different states. There are some states that make more of an effort to adequately fund their schools. There are some states that work harder. All states have problems with equal educational opportunity, but some work harder to lessen that opportunity gap than other states. And what it's coming down to right now, what we're starting to see is this pattern emerge over and over again, where you've got some states that are really making an effort to try to fund their schools adequately, and you've got some states that are not. And this is, I think, one of the biggest issues facing education right now. We always seem to have these distractions. So the latest distraction is the reading wars, right? Where everybody has their ideas about how to teach reading. I'm not saying that's not important. I am saying that if you don't have a baseline of adequate funding, it doesn't matter how you teach reading, you're just not going to be able to have the resources to do it properly. So that's what we try to point out in this report. And again, we're finding this pattern where we just have too many children who are attending schools that don't have what they need to meet their educational goals.
What I find interesting is I've talked to a number of Republican legislators over the years, and they always say the same thing as a response to what you said. Well, we can't throw money at the problem. And, money's not the solution. I go, well, money doesn't matter until you don't have it. If you don't have the adequate funds to hire the proper staff, to have, the right facilities and be able to solve some of the societal problems that you, especially high poverty areas, have, you're going to get poor outcomes. And I'm sorry, slashing and burning budgets is not the way forward. And also, not just slashing and burning budgets, but coming up with silver bullet solutions, especially in poor neighborhoods, that's not going to do it either.
Right. That's exactly right. Our lead author, Bruce Baker, who's really the one who conceived of these models that we use and these measures that we've developed over the years. Bruce has a great saying about this. You can't spend wisely if you don't have money to spend in the first place. Everybody's for having schools spend wisely. We should, and the public should hold schools to account for making good decisions about where we put our money. But if you don't have the money to begin with, it doesn't matter anyway. And this, to me, that argument is so strange. Nobody would make this argument about the military. I mean, certainly we're all against military spending waste, but nobody would say that you can't have money to be able to buy bullets and then expect the military to do its job. We say the same thing about law enforcement. Why don't we say this about education? Why is it so hard for people to understand that it costs money to run schools? Now, the one issue that you just brought up that I do think sometimes we need to do a better job of getting the public to understand is that some kids need more funding in order to have the same opportunities as other kids. The obvious example, if you have a child who has a learning disability, say they are deaf blind, or say they have a traumatic brain injury, or they're on autism spectrum, I don't think anybody would argue that that child is going to require more resources. And I don't think that too many people would begrudge them that. Well, we have to think the same way about poverty. And we have plenty of evidence that this is the case. Children who are in poverty need more resources in order to equalize their educational opportunity. And yet we do exactly the opposite in almost every state in the country. We spend more on schools that have low poverty rates, on neighborhoods and school districts that have lower rates of poverty than we do in schools that have higher rates of poverty. It's exactly the opposite of what we should be doing.
But isn't that because, most of the time we fund education through local property taxes. So clearly neighborhoods who have higher property values are going to have more tax dollars to fund their schools, which then raises the value of their property. It's a positive, snowball upward, making things positive. But on the other side of this, if you live in a high poverty area with low property values, well, there's a problem.
These are perpetual motion machines, right? What you're describing is exactly right. You have high property values, that leads to more money, that leads to better schools, that leads to high property values, and so on. And the cycle works in the other way as well. I tell my graduate students who are studying education funding, a lot of times they'll say, well, why don't we get rid of property taxes? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. One of the things about property taxes is that they're stable. They tend not to fluctuate over time. And you want to have a stable source of revenue when you're involved in funding something like a school. Yeah. But the clear negative is that they are regressive and it's difficult to have equity. So what we need is a good mix of different kinds of revenue. That's the kind of thing that we've proposed before. In a report last year, we think the federal government should get more involved. And if a state shows that it's making an effort, it's doing its best to raise funding for its schools, the federal government ought to come in and help those states that don't have the capacity to raise adequate funding for themselves.
So let me stop you here, because this is something that is going to really grate on me now, because I'm looking at your report, and your report says about 60% of the nation's students that we identified as being chronically underfunded districts, the 20% of districts with the most inadequate funding in the nation are in just 10 states. You go through Alabama, you go through Arkansas, you go through Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, Texas. With the exception of New Mexico and sometimes Nevada, those are all heavily red states who in most cases have made choices not to fund schools, not to tax people, to use that money for education. So wouldn't this just be more of a transfer from states that are willing, like New York and California, to fund these red states that are the basically tax moochers?
It's a great question, Rick, and it really gets to the heart of the matter. I'll reiterate what I said was the federal government, we believe, should get more involved if states are making an effort to raise adequate funds. You mentioned Mississippi on that list. Mississippi, according to our report, actually makes a good effort in terms of a percentage of its economy to raise funding for its schools. The problem is Mississippi is a very poor state. It doesn't have a very big economy and it can't raise a lot of money. Contrast that to Florida. Florida is a state that has adequate capacity to raise its taxes, and yet it's refused to do so. I agree with you. Unless a state like Florida is willing to step up and do what it's supposed to do, I don't think the rest of the nation should fund that. I thought it was really interesting. I guess it was this past week that Ron DeSantis was pointing to Florida and saying, well, I think Florida is so well run, it ought to be a model for the rest of the nation.
No.
Well, when it comes to school funding, I can tell you that it is actually a very poor model and definitely one that other states should not follow.
Now, I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. I grew up in a high poverty neighborhood. So this issue to me is important because, I want that kid growing up in the same place that I grew up to have the same opportunities that I had, at least the same opportunities that I had, if not better. But I don't see that. Sadly, I'm not seeing that. And now, when I was a kid, busing was all the rage, and we had to live through that. And I remember one of the arguments that came out of the busing movement was, instead of moving kids around, how about we just move districts around? Like we do with congressional districts. Can't we just redraw school districts and put, wealthier people into poorer districts to kind of raise the income levels up? Because we do know in districts with wealthier people, they're going to want better things for their kids too.
Well, you would think that, except a lot of the states that you were talking about that inadequately fund their schools, they have countywide districts. Florida is a good example of that. And so it's got, compared to, say, New Jersey or Pennsylvania, other places in the Northeast that have a lot of small home rule districts, Florida has very big ones. Florida's problem is overall, it doesn't want to raise revenues.
Right.
And in fact, we have pretty good indication that for wealthier families, they will tend to opt out of the public system altogether in schools like that, or they will go out into the private market and provide all sorts of supplemental things for their children that children who are in poverty don't get to have. It's a fundamental question of values, Rick, for me. Do you really believe in true equality? Do you really believe in true equal opportunity? Well, if you do, every child should have a great education. A great education should not be denied to a child simply because of the tax capacity of where they live. And so our report is saying it is time to start making some real good public policy choices and get the funding into schools that need it in order to equalize these educational opportunities.
Now, one of the things, and to highlight this, one of the things that you point out in this report, that the biggest gaps in the most unequal opportunities are in states like Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts, where, like I think you laying this out, where you have very wealthy districts, you have very wealthy, people wanting the best for their kids, and sadly, you have high poverty areas. How does the federal government get involved in places like this? What would that mechanism look like? And I guess what I'm asking is, what should we be doing? Because I want to make sure that, as I said, I want to make sure that that kid growing up, or where I grew up, has an opportunity and doesn't end up like a lot of my friends, on social programs, in prison, or worse. So what I guess should we be doing?
You mentioned the federal government. I live in New Jersey. That's one of those unequal states. And if you look at our report, there are some inadequately funded districts in New Jersey, but most are adequately funded. The problem is that as you point out, there is a huge difference between extremely wealthy districts that are spending a lot of money and districts that might be spending enough to meet modest standards, but certainly aren't equivalent to these other very wealthy districts. I'm not very optimistic. I'm not a political scientist, but I'm not very optimistic that the federal government is in any position to come in and do something about that. I think, in my own work with New Jersey Policy Perspective, we are looking for action at the state level, and I think we're more likely to see that be successful. We have seen movement toward full funding of New Jersey's school funding formula, but we also believe that we have to relook at the formula and really take a look at what is an adequate education. What does it mean to actually fully fund a school? And as part of the process of looking at that, we want to make sure that we have a revenue system in place where we don't punish anybody for spending on their schools, but at the same time, there is enough revenue overall that everybody can have an equal educational opportunity. There's some technical kind of programs that we can do to solve that too. We could take commercial property and manufacturing property, things like that, and instead make it available statewide, so it's not available just at the local level as a taxing capacity. There are other things that we can do, but again, for me, I'm much more optimistic we can make those changes at the state level than at the federal level, especially given who's in the House of Representatives right now.
Yeah, last line of questioning I've got for you, kind of off report, maybe part of this plays into it, but it seems to me, especially in high poverty areas, we always come up with these silver bullet ideas. These quick fixes. Hey, we've got this newfangled idea. When we know what works, look at the wealthier districts and look at what they do, and maybe emulate some of that. Smaller class sizes, better paid teachers, better resources, kids who have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Some stability, things like that. But yet we come up with cyber charter schools, vouchers. Name the lettered program after lettered program, always to divide the money, that the little money that they've got. Or am I just being cynical?
No, I think you have described the last 30 years of education policy in America. And I hate to say it, in many ways, the Democrats have been as guilty as the Republicans of this. We're going to come in, we're going to have school choice. We're going to diminish the power of teachers' unions. We're going to change the way we teach reading. We're going to have teacher evaluation, right? All of these things, we try them and they don't work. And as you said, Rick, if you look at two districts, one that is quote unquote successful and the other quote unquote failing, look at what the differences are. Both of them will have unionized teacher corps. Both of them will have public schools. Both of them will be tied to geographic areas. Both of them will have similar curricula. What's the difference? The difference is resources. The difference is class sizes. The difference is teacher salaries. The difference is broad and rich curricula. These are the things that we know work. We know that kids are more successful when they are in a well-funded school. That's what we got to do, but that's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to make political choices. And so when you have, as you say, the silver bullet, that's very tempting to put into your gun and think, oh, well, we've solved everything. It's not going to work, folks. We have to adequately fund schools. There's just no way out of it.
Yeah, well, it hasn't worked, and I don't see anything to tell me that the future is going to give us any different results. We need to do what we know works. But Mark, I appreciate you taking some time sharing some thoughts on this report. We'll make sure we get links out on social media, how folks can take a look at the report. Good stuff.
Thanks, Rick. Always a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much, our good friend Mark Weber. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Right back.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania, to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, President of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The old factory towns in America's heartland have been taking a beating. Thing is, though, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The new CHIPS bill that got passed will bring jobs back home and has already resulted in big announcements of major new factories opening. The American Recovery Package has allowed cities and counties to hire new police officers and firefighters and start rebuilding their communities again. We're finally turning things around after 40 years of screwing over working people. But will we keep moving in the right direction? That's our choice.
So I'm not quite sure when the Babylon Bee turned into the Onion. Not sure. They used to try and be, like conservative news. Now it looks like they've completely jumped the shark and have gone full on Onion with the headlines. And look, the Taylor Swift derangement syndrome. Wow, the right losing their minds over Taylor Swift. And the headline over at the Babylon Bee caught my attention. It's a long one. Conservatives uncovered Democrat plot to turn Taylor Swift into an international pop star and the Kansas City Chiefs into a dynasty so Swift could date a Chief player and leverage the collective media coverage to get Joe Biden reelected. What a plot! And who could have thunk it? Who would have thunk it? Now this is the same organization there at the Bee that had the headline, Brock Purdy excited to finally see Taylor Swift live as he can't afford era tour tickets. And look, they were fairly expensive. But this evidently is conservative news. And look, when you're reporting on conservatives and conservative causes, I guess this is the best you can do. So I guess good on them. You might as well go full on fake news satire and jump the shark and try and compete with the Onion. But here's the thing. When you've got some real things to talk about, Chuck Grassley evidently is now saying, that bipartisan tax bill that people were gonna maybe pass the child tax credit, make sure that we don't have hungry children, maybe do something about the salt tax, something that conservatives want, mind you, that Trump did, that they want fixed, they want undone. Grassley said, maybe not. No, and you know why? Here's his quote: "Passing a tax bill that makes the president look good, mailing out checks before the election, means he could be reelected, and then we won't extend the 2017 tax cuts." And he said, "Look, it's gonna make Biden look good. Can't do that. It's gonna improve the Democrats' chance to hold the White House. Can't possibly do that." And look, he's not alone. The sad reality is the Senate is now losing their mind as you've got GOP leaders going, that bipartisan, border deal that we may have been close to, that's dead on arrival, because it could make the president look good, could help him get reelected. Yeah, could do that. And you go, isn't that your job to get stuff done? If there really is a crisis at the border, if there's really a problem, shouldn't you do that? Now, Representative Troy Nehls, a Republican from Texas, said Tuesday, Congress doesn't have to do anything to secure our border, our southern border, and fix it. Congress doesn't have to do anything. It's the president's job. He says, quote, "Why would I help Joe Biden approve his dismal 33.5% approval rating when he can fix the border and secure it on his own? He can secure it on his own through executive order." No, not really. But here's the thing. This is what they do. They say, look, crisis, problem, but no solutions, no fix, no action. lots of words, lots of chaos, lots of finger pointing, no accountability, no responsibility, no action. And it's all about the politics. When Chuck Grassley, a guy who's been in the Senate forever and wasn't always crazy, now comes out and says, well, no, we're not going to do anything that makes Biden look good, even though in his state of Iowa, it would help working people. Even though in his state, it would help people who need it the most. This is the part that's most infuriating. We have these people in Congress who are looking us right in the eye going, yeah, we know you're struggling. We know you need help. We know there's a problem. We know we need to fix it. But screw you, we're not doing it. Because we're more important than you. That's what this is about. This is about their political goals, their political ideology, their political dreams. Doesn't matter if your children go to bed hungry. Doesn't matter if your children are now going to have to enter the workforce to be able to support the family. In fact, folks in Iowa, representatives there are going, yeah, absolutely. Get those kids back into the meat in the slaughterhouses. Legislature in Iowa or in Indiana, go get those kids back out on the farm. Yeah, they don't need to go past the 8th grade. It was good enough for our grandparents. It's crazy. And the thing is our mainstream media, are they covering this? Am I missing a bunch of this conversation? When they're looking us in the eye and telling us we're not doing a damn thing for you. We're doing nothing for you. Doesn't that make you go, maybe we don't vote for these people? Maybe it's time to throw these bums out? Doesn't it make you angry? I mean, look, I know this country is run on outrage and fervor and anger. I get that. But this is something, honestly, this is something to get upset about. This is something to be mad about. This is something to get your panties in a bunch over. You're paying this guy to tell you, I'm doing squat for you. And you'll like it. And you'll vote for me. Because I've trained you to hate the other guy that much more. Yeah, that's what they've done. And how do you like it? Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. You miss any portion of the program, grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Thanks so much for being here. As always, thank you. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.